now.
Well, thank you very much, Chef. It's great to be here. I really appreciate the invitation, and I'm really excited to be spending some time with you this evening. Thank you for taking care of a good deal of the housekeeping, but I'll cover a little bit more. Please, by all means, feel free to ask as many questions as you'd like. Reach out. I know Chef Derek is going to read questions as they come in, and then I'm going to make time at the end, probably around 15 minutes to be able to answer any and all questions you may have regarding the presentation or regarding others as well. Please, again, I invite you to pick my brain. I'm here. So I guess let's start with welcome and Happy New Year to everybody. Like I said, some of these things were covered already, but I would encourage you to take notes, use the chat for questions. I tend to forget questions, and I'm certainly not going to be able to read them because once I get into presentation, it's hard for me to pay attention to anybody else. I also invite you to let me know if my video is funny or if my audio is not sounding right, because I can't tell what's going on your end. So please, by all means, let me know. Please mute if you're not talking. Ask as many questions as you like. And what I would encourage you to do is use your reactions and raise your hand if you've got something that you want to add, or if you've got something that you really want to talk about. I know some people tend to be a little Zoom shy. If you're a little Zoom shy, don't worry about it. Enter your question in the chat. If you're not Zoom shy, throw your question up, and then we'll happily call on you and pick your brain, hear what you have to say. I also wanted to say that I'm really excited to hear that the competition and the competition's coming up, and I'm really excited to hear that you have so many spots for certification filled up. That's great news. It's a beautiful thing, and it's a good path for sure. I think it's a good way to establish legacy with new culinarians and to help people find themselves a little more vested in this career. Well, it's been good to me, my path of certification. So little plug for you there, Chef. Hopefully that helps. Let's see. So let's talk a little bit today about the craftsman, or where art meets science. So this conversation started with Claudia a few months ago when she reached out to me and said, you know, Chef, we'd really like to have you back and have you talk to the group, to talk to our chapter. And well, I'm always thrilled to talk to the chapter, but what I want to know is what everybody else wants to hear about. And so I heard that you were interested in hearing about art and science, or where art meets science. At least that was what I put out there. And that was the topic that was chosen. And for me, I think that we grew up in a world where art and science are often separated. It's art or science. You are an artist or you are a scientist. And I think back to when I was a younger culinarian. I remember Thomas Keller was asked, you know, if cooking or if culinary was an art. And I remember him very specifically saying, yes and no, actually, at the event that I was at. And I thought his justification was really interesting for that. And that's kind of the motivation for some of the conversation that I'm going to have today. See, I think we are all capable of so much work. We are all capable of so many wonderful things, and we're presented with such a wonderful bounty of ingredients that we have to select from, to choose from, to work with. And I think we're quite honored to be able to have all of those products to us. So I think it's really important to incorporate the two things, the art and the science. To me, the art creates it, but the science makes it reproducible. So this is a dish that was pulled from modernist cooking. And I think it's a really interesting example, because when you want to pick apart an onion, you can do a lot of different things with an onion. But if you want to spend a ton of time developing a dish, developing a component, developing a piece, that's usually driven by art, passion, by curiosity, and a lot of things that are really intangible in a lot of ways. And I think as cooks, we tend to consider ourselves artists. I think the cook tends to think of themselves as the one who, you know, puts the flash in the pan, who adds a little of this at the last second, who adjusts at the last moment with a little bit of salt, tastes, adjusts, tastes. So that was the definition of the cook as an artist as I grew up in the industry. The other side of that is the science side, or what I would call the pastry side, the side that I don't want to say worships the recipe because that's not fair, but appreciates and embraces the science and the methodology that goes into a well-written recipe. I think as chefs, we often find ourselves on one end of the spectrum or the other. If we have a significant amount of pastry background, then we tend to be on the more science side. If we tend to be on the more culinary focused, culinary forward side of things, we tend to be on the more artistic side. It was through my career and through my competition, through my certifications, through the work that I've done in my business, with my family, and all of these other pieces that changed the lens and how I saw the world, that helped me recognize that these two ends of the spectrum were actually one. They were helping me find a way to one inevitable end result. Most specifically, there was one event that comes to mind. And the event was in a discussion with Chef Keith Keogh about recipes when I was working with the Olympic team. We were spending a lot of time tasting and adjusting. And every time we would produce a recipe, it was never exactly the same. And this really irritated Chef Keogh. And I would say irritated to the point of enraged. And the problem was that we were measuring things in ounces, and we weren't even really measuring everything. There was a lot of two tastes and things like that in our recipes. And I'm not saying that everything needs to be super conformed, but what I'm inviting is the thought process that needs to happen when you start looking at high-level reproduction. You'll hear me say time and time again that consistency is the result of a well-functioning operation. And that's an operation that I think embraces both art and science. And so as a group of cooks on a culinary team, we had the art piece down pat. We were cooking food that was pretty, that was actually beautiful, that tasted good. It was just taking us a lot of extra steps to get there. Instead of dumping in a container of exactly the right amount based on our experience, based on our research, and based on our practicing, it was add a little bit, taste, add a little bit, stir, taste, add a little bit, stir, taste. And time again, things were taking far longer than they needed to, or far longer than we had time for. And so the target that was presented to me by Chef Keogh, because he put this on my shoulders, was to be able to dump a container into a pot and to be able to have the seasoning at least 90% of the way to where we needed it. So that way we didn't have to spend so much time adjusting. He didn't say take it right to the edge. He said get to within 90% of exactly where you want to be. And he showed me this method that then made all the sense in the world. And since then, we started calling it the Keogh method. This is the Keogh recipe method. And it involves scaling everything, cooking as we would cook with our art, and then scaling all the containers one more time so that we could basically subtract the difference between those two things, and that would give us the quantity of product used. We used grams because a gram is 28.34 times more accurate than an ounce. And we would then work in percentages, just like a baker would, just like a scientist would, in order to make adjustments. Mind-blowing. There was a mind-blowing revelation here as we started talking about salt in relationship to a recipe. And Chef Keogh would then step back and say, you know, what I'd really like to see is I'd like to see this 50% saltier, not a little bit saltier. So we would know if we used 2 grams of salt that he wanted us to add another gram of salt. It allowed us a measurable way in order to proceed forward. It allowed us to see in a little more scientific way how to incorporate the science, how to incorporate that work into the art that we were then executing. Xanthan gum, if we needed to make things 25% thicker, became a little bit more clear how to go about doing that. And it all started with having this nice, clear baseline, this very clear baseline of where we were starting. Even if it was ugly, even if it was a disaster, at least we had a starting point that we could then bounce off of, and then effectively scale our recipes for overproduction or for underproduction. So if we needed to reduce production by 50%, it was very easy to enter another percentage and cut the thing in half. You end up with funny little tails and funny little numbers based on the grams that you're using. But again, very scientific approach to something that I never would have put that much effort into being accurate about. Now, why is this relevant? This is relevant because I feel like I grew up in a kitchen culture where yes, chef was the only answer, and where I had no choice but to do what I was told. Even if the recipe that was given to me was wrong, it was still my fault. I can't hold my cooks, and I won't hold my cooks to that standard anymore. If I'm giving somebody a recipe, I need my recipe to work, and I need my recipe to be reproducible. Now, as I said, the lens of which we view the world through kind of changes the way that we see things. When I go into an operation, which there's often times when I go and do a dinner in a private club or at a hotel or something like that, and I usually have 24 to 48 hours of time to mise en place. I need my recipes to work, and I need anybody to be able to work with them. I don't have time to get emotional. I don't have time to get upset. I need people to be able to work with me on the fly. And so those recipes then allow me to do that. Oftentimes I need to bring gram scales so that way I can operate and function in that space. But again, a gram is 28.34 times more precise than an ounce. That's why I think metric system just beats the standard system, or beats the imperial system by a landslide. Please feel free, if you have any questions, hop in. I'm going to take a sip of beverage here. So as I said, I grew up in a world where there were artists and there were scientists, or there were cooks and there were pastry chefs. And that was kind of how this was laid out in front of me. But what I want to encourage you to do is to seek the higher level, to seek the next piece. When you find a way to be both the art and the artist and the scientists, I think you become a craftsman. I think that's when you start to incorporate and you start to reach that craft mentality that says, I appreciate the aspects of art. I appreciate the tactics of art, but I also appreciate the strategy behind the science. Like I said, the artist usually leads to creation, but it's the scientist that allows those things to be replicated. If you look at large food production companies, you look at companies like Cargill that do, what is it, 28 billion in food. They have food scientists who then lead to a much higher level reproducible result. The push is to become the craftsman or craftswoman. Then after we talk about the craftsman a bit, we're going to talk about some integration pieces as well. I promise not to leave you hanging and just give you a whole bunch of information without giving you some practical stuff. If you think about the Bocuse d'Or, right? The Bocuse d'Or at the surface is seen as a very artistic competition. But if you watch these teams like, well, I mean, let's speak specifically of some of the Nordic teams, right? Who are super methodical. Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Switzerland. These countries are so scientific about their approach that it allows them to be artistic, right? They're always building off of their baseline because they have such a high baseline that's been established. If you get down to it and you start unpacking the skills that go into these dishes, you're going to see that at the end of the day, they're all fundamental pieces. If you look at this beautiful bowl with this perfect little dumpling in it, it's a steamed dumpling with a nice tasty broth, a perfectly executed filling, a beautiful cracker. Yes, it's embellished upon, But at the end of the day, it's still fundamental technique. It's still science. It's still a consistent recipe that then gets replicated. And once that happens, then it's far easier to build on top of that. Now, where the complexity comes in, I think, is where we start to combine all of these individual little pieces, all of these individual little fundamentals, and we start to build them together. But just like anything, there's building blocks. If you look at a pastry plate, you'll see the science. You know that there's science that goes into the utilization of hydrocolloids. You know that there's science that goes into the replication of the perfect cake. When you see the art that goes into a plate, then you realize that, okay, very often people make a force meat without a particular formula, or people brine without a particular formula. What I would argue, though, is that the same application of those pieces, in my experience, allows your team to follow you in a far more consistent way with replicating the force meat, with brining product, with reproducing purees, and with keeping blanched greens nice and bright, beautiful, perfectly seasoned. That main shift is not being the scientist or the artist, it's being the scientist and the artist. It's being the craftsman who incorporates those so that way you can create it and the team can reproduce it. Like I said, it all comes down to building blocks. Like with anything, as you go to a higher level, you'll understand that everything revolves around particular fundamental building blocks. This beautiful dumpling here that was, again, used for the Bocuse d'Or, and I use that because it's January and the Bocuse d'Or is coming up, so it's on my mind. But this was taken out of context for a goulash. It's a stuffed pasta with braised oxtail and a clarified broth, but all based on this Hungarian competitor's history. Again, high-level fundamentals executed consistently with science behind it so that it could be replicated and refined. And as I said, there's always building blocks, right? So when it comes to cooking, whether it's art or science that's driving the thought process or that's driving the conversation, there's cooking techniques at the core of it. There's flavor profiles. There's standards that you've developed, the staples that you use that contribute to how the food comes together, the specific ingredients that are delivered to your kitchen and how they're delivered, the seasoning involved, your culinary philosophy, your rules for the kitchen, for the team, the way that you go about doing the work that you do, the nuance that you've picked up after 10, 12, 15, 20 years in the kitchen, the habits that you display when you're not paying attention, the experience that you have, and the expertise that you showcase all build your three-dimensional culinary philosophy. Earlier today, I had the privilege of working with a group of chefs, and I was walking them through a culinary discovery with the intention of pulling out these pieces with them, because each one of those things is going to be a highlight that draws people in, that draws staff in, that allows them to showcase a culinary brand that is going to interest the newer generation of cooks. Let's be realistic. People are looking for staff. But I can tell you that where you're looking for staff is going to determine what kind of staff you get. If you're not looking for staff on Instagram, you're probably not going to get a whole lot of young cooks into your operation. If you're looking on Indeed, you're going to find an older chef with a different level of experience. If you're looking on culinary job boards, you're going to have a different experience. You're going to be exposed to a different cook. And marketing yourself as a culinarian to them requires unpacking and reverse engineering a lot of these things that you do. At least that's in my opinion. And that's what I've done that has helped me to build a brand that allows people to seek me out to work with me. Is my video coming through clear, Chef? Okay, good. Sorry, I saw somebody saying they were having some troubles with Wi-Fi. I wanted to make sure that everything was okay. So when it comes to differentiating between art and science, I think it's just as similar as separating logic from emotion, right? Art tends to be emotional. Science tends to be logical. And that's something that I think every single one of us as a chef can learn to embrace and can be more effective in our work with. When we become the master of the logical argument, it allows us to clearly relay a thought. It allows us to get away from the emotional side. It allows us to not get sucked into the drain of the people that we serve, disliking something that we put on the menu. It allows us to recognize that they don't like something that we put on the menu so that we can make different decisions for it. Doesn't matter where you start. If you start with art or with science, too much of one will lead you down a challenging path. If you apply too much logic to your food, then food tends to be emotionless. And that's also when people tend to say that, food is dry or food has no passion behind it. If there's too many systems in place, then there's not a lot of room for the chef to exercise the way that the chef exercises with their passion or with their emotion. We all have room in every single business and every single industry for all of the varying lines in between. But for me, what served me best is being the master of the logical argument and being passionate in the work that I do on my day-to-day. So where I started and where I was most recently in my career are almost two very dissimilar pieces. See, I had to learn that I could do anything, but I couldn't do everything. I hope that makes sense, right? Like I'm capable of doing anything that I want to. I'm capable of teaching a team anything that I want to. But as far as getting the team to do everything that I want them to do requires a little bit of deeper thinking. This was another one of those big ahas, which incidentally coincided really well with my recipe realization in saying, okay, there's things that I want to be able to do. I want to make all of my muffins from scratch. I want to be able to make all of my barbecue sauces from scratch. I do, but is it something that my team can handle? Now, the emotion in me says, okay, well, just make them do it. Well, the scientist in me says, well, if I still hold them to a standard that they can't execute it, then I'm going to be the one that has to do all of this stuff anyway. Which leads me to banana pudding. I know, right? It's a bumpy little line, but banana pudding. I moved to the South, didn't necessarily know much about banana pudding, but I realized that there was no point in spending all of this time and effort in making what I thought was the perfect dessert when my team had the understanding and the maturity to help me understand that my membership wanted banana pudding. Humbling, incredibly humbling, but necessary. Now, the challenge that I faced with the banana pudding then became a matter of who made the banana pudding when, and if it was too dry, because if it was made on Wednesdays and it was made by Amanda, everybody loved it and it was absolutely perfect. But if it was made on Thursdays by Stephen, nobody liked it because it was dry and everybody thought it was absolutely awful. So obviously sales suffer. And when I talk about consistency, well, that becomes a really important issue to discuss. So that's why I try and talk about science, I guess at first at a high level, and then bring it down to a very practical, tangible lower level and say like, well, let's talk about exactly how we're going to make this banana pudding nice and consistent so that we can have this delivered to our staff the same way every single time. Or delivered to my membership. Sorry, I said staff, but I was thinking membership. Does that make sense so far? And I guess I was fortunate enough to be able to step back outside of the situation and understand, okay, well, that applies to basically everything. Every little thing that I wanted to do just required me breaking it down to a point where anybody on my team could then do the work that I needed done, could deliver the product that I needed them to deliver, which allowed me to do the work that I needed to do. Again, allowing me to balance between those two pieces required me to be really uncomfortable and get super granular about things that I never really thought that I had to be that granular about. And when I say granular, I mean very, very clear, very specific in talking about salt levels in vinaigrettes, salt levels in brines, making sure that brining times were super specific for the team. Because if I wanted fish brined, then I needed to make sure that not only did I have the time clearly defined, but I was also checking on it. And I was at the same time teaching my sous chefs the importance of checking on it as well. Another piece of science. Another piece that I was a little bit uncomfortable with at first, but allowed me to fully elevate myself to a whole nother level once everything in the kitchen wasn't dependent on me and doing it. So now as it comes to integration, I want to talk a little bit about the French Laundry. I mean, so who out there has read the French Laundry cookbook? If you want to throw a hand up in the chat or just say yes in the chat, something like that, let me know. I feel like here. Yeah, I feel like it was a textbook for a lot of us. I know for me, early 2000, the original French Laundry came out. That thing went with me everywhere. And I think over time, I've ended up with 4 or 5 copies of it. I mean, it's one of those books that's, it's a tome. And there's a fair number of recipes in there that are a little agitating to reproduce. But one of the big pieces to me is how clear Thomas Keller is on his standards, on his functions, and on all of the itsy bitsy little idiosyncrasies that need to take place in his kitchen in order for his food to be replicated. I'm sure most everybody out there who runs their operation knows full well that they're not the ones on the line at the stove cooking their food all the time. So for him, if his recipes aren't beautifully dialed in, then nobody's going to reproduce them. And I don't know if anybody knows this or if you've ever talked to an intern there, but there's actually vocabulary that the commis need to learn before they can elevate up in their status in that kitchen. They need to learn the way that things are talked about in that kitchen. They need to learn what everything's called. We all do that in culinary school, but how different is one operation from the next? I would argue that from my operation to Chef Derek's operation to, Chef Burrow's operation, there are all little tweaks and little things that are different in there that if we're not properly communicating our expectation up front, then by no means is anybody just going to get it by mistake. At least that's what I've found. And so Chef Keller doesn't take that for granted. He doesn't leave it to chance. He has a very clear systemic approach to ensuring that depending on the level that you are in his kitchen, you have a specific amount of information. Sorry, a little out of order here. If you look at it, a lot of it comes back down to his brigade system, right? The classical brigade system that we're all familiar with, where, the new cooks come in, they learn from the cooks that have been there just moments before. Not all of us have the opportunity to have the amount of staff that Chef Keller has, and nor can we get that many people to work for us for free that often. But if you're leading with really solid systems and you're putting the effort into hiring people while communicating the information down the pipeline, then your team will build the legacy behind them. The things that the team needs to be able to do, the things that the information that needs to be there, means that it has to be reproducible. You have to be predictable. The recipes, the processes, the procedures all need to be structured, at least for the incoming and the second level staff to be able to execute. The communication needs to be clear. It also needs to be simple. It needs to be simple based on where that culinarian is in their career and what they can comprehend, not necessarily the information that we have in us that we're then communicating.
The chart's reading a little bit blurry. Would you be able to zoom in so we can see it better? Yeah, I think that looks better.
Cool. Sorry about that, Chef. Thank you.
Okay.
So it's a brigade system for sure, but then my bullet points up in the top left, are those clear?
Yeah, those are clear.
Gotcha. And so in order to get most recipes, most processes, most standard operating procedures to a point where, the basic brand new cook or fresh culinary school grad can come into the operation, they need to be reproducible, predictable, structured, clear, simple, and consistent. And for me, that's become 6 of my objectives in my management style as a craftsman. I need you to be able to reproduce what I show you. I need to be predictable so that when you come to me, you're not concerned about my reaction. I need to have a structure that allows you to know the answer to the majority of the questions that you're going to ask me. And that keeps me from having to answer a ton of unnecessary questions or a ton of extra questions anyway. I need to be clear, not clear for me, clear based on what my cook can understand or what my culinarian will understand. I need to be simple because I still need my people to be able to walk away and be able to execute it. One of my favorite examples is coq au vin, but we can talk about another one, risotto, right? There's a lot of complexity in a simple dish such as risotto. And how often have you sent somebody, or do you know someone who has sent someone for an internet search on risotto? Have you seen the answers that come up online looking for risotto? I mean, I've found recipes for basmati rice finished with cream. I found some decent ones using bumbo rice, which is funny to me because that's Spanish. There's obviously legitimate recipes, but there's a fair number of bad ones scattered in there. But if you're not being scientific in your approach about what recipe you share with people, and they're just Google searching something, I think you're allowing a lot of opportunity for disaster to strike your operation, to strike your kitchen. I think it's miscommunication in the beginning. There was a phase when in the early 2000s, maybe 2007, where I spent a little bit of time with a sous chef who was always in the office. And in the office, he would print out recipes And then he'd give them to the cooks as he would write these menus, but he wouldn't vet the recipes. He wouldn't necessarily look through things. And then he would get upset when people would execute the recipes as the recipe said, but that was wrong to the sous chef's ideal of what was supposed to happen. And in my opinion, looking back, he wasn't paying enough attention to the science aspect of reproducing the work that needed to be reproduced so that the kitchen staff could be successful. So then I go back to, is the information reproducible, predictable, structured, clear, simple, and consistent? Because once it is, then you can take the science that goes into making a risotto and you can be artistic about it. You can pay attention to the simple individual little components that is Parmesan cheese, arborio rice, or vialone rice, or vialone nano rice. Understand the nuance and the culture that it comes from. Understand the Northern Italian style of cooking. Put the effort into beautiful broth, great Parmigiano Reggiano, and make beautiful croquettes. I'm not saying that it has to be purely just those ingredients, but depending on the ingredients that are chosen, there's plenty of room in there for both art and science to collide and become craft. 18-year-old Parmigiano Reggiano has a very different flavor than 6-month. It's a very different thing. Both have their place, both have their opportunities. Chicken stock can be fortified. It doesn't even have to be chicken stock. It could be Parmesan cheese stock made with the rind of the Parmigiano Reggiano. The understanding of the science leads to the art. And then these simple ingredients come together and form something beautiful that's been done and can evolve into something beautiful that maybe hasn't been done. The next piece to me is figuring out how to manage or measure a metric. This to me is the first real clear step into implementing a scientific mentality if you focus on the art side. So start where you like, start as a full artist or start as a full scientist, but figuring out how to manage a measurement will make all the difference in the world. Think about sous vide. I think sous vide is a blessing and a curse, like most things. I think it can be a crutch. I think it can be a good thing. I think it can be a terrible thing. But one of the things I do value is being able to cook a tenderloin or a strip loin or a ribeye or anything for that matter to an exact temperature and then allow for a point of discussion. I love that I can nowadays take a probe, cook my tenderloin to 129.8 degrees, chill it, then sear it, retherm it, and serve it to a banquet for 250 people, and all of them can be the same. I love that I can take that same thing, that same tenderloin cooked at 129.8 degrees, and I can serve it to a tasting, and they can tell me that it's either undercooked or that it's overcooked, and I can adjust precisely to a whole nother point, and then I can reproduce those results. I love that I can do that, and I couldn't operate at the level that I do consistently the way that I do if I didn't know that, if I didn't have that information to then share with the team that was around me to help them understand the benefit of not stressing about overcooking or undercooking the tenderloins, but cooking them exactly as prescribed. That's science. It's science at work, which then allows me to put my time and energy and my stress into the art. So things like viscosity can be measured, temperature can be measured, time can be measured. Another exercise, something that I absolutely love to do with my new cooks. I always carry around a pocket full of 90-minute timers. And I love when cooks tell me that things will be 2 minutes. 2 minutes, chef, 4 minutes, chef, 2 minutes, chef. And I just set a timer to count up, and I hand them a timer, and I just let them know that I'll be back in 2 minutes, to help them understand what time is, to help them understand how far off they are on time, and to help everybody understand what a real minute is, or what a real 4 minutes looks like. It's not so much that I want it in exactly 2 minutes every single time. I just want your 2 minutes to mean 2 minutes. And I'm sure everybody can relate. I know if you've expedited, you've heard a very unrealistic 2 minutes that felt a lot like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, based on no real data whatsoever. It makes it a lot easier to have a logical argument when you have something like a timer that's just simply measuring time, to have that discussion with a culinarian then and there. I think the newer generation of cooks is very intelligent. I think they're bored in a lot of ways. I think they come equipped with some significant tools, and I think it's really important to be able to give them real, factual, emotionless, logical data to be able to say, I'm sorry, that was really 6 minutes. Okay. Now that gives us a baseline, that gives us an opportunity to be able to talk, that gives us an opportunity to find a place so that we can work forward together. What does that say? I'm reading. Had a long time cook. Everything was 30 seconds. Yep. 30 seconds could be 10 minutes. 30 seconds could be 2 seconds. Yeah, I understand. Been there, done that. Absolutely. Deal with it all the time. Measuring, it works with budgets, progress, time, profits, success, and member satisfaction, or client satisfaction, or guest satisfaction. Approaching a curious scientific attitude can allow you to get a lot more resources that you're going to want, that you're going to ask for. It just allows you the information to have the baseline, the bedrock behind it, to get what you really need. Do you need me to zoom in a little bit, Chef? Does that help? Sorry, Chef Derek. I saw you. I saw you looking real close. Thanks. Right? So just approaching it, trying to get away from the zone of what I heard so much as a young cook was, I feel that, or I think that, and getting it back down, dialed into the point where it's like, no, it is actually this, allows for a much more solid conversation. It allows for a much more efficient conversation, and it allows all of our work to be reproducible, because I can't work on the work that I need to work on. Yeah, I meant to say it that way. If the team isn't doing the work that I need them to do. And they can't do it if I'm not communicating with them the right way. Remember, art creates it. Science makes it reproducible. And that's just my opinion on the matter. So any questions, thoughts, comments?
I do have a question for you, Jeff, that's not necessarily related to your presentation.
That's okay.
But have you seen the movie The Menu, and what did you think of it if you've seen it?
It's actually, it's on my list of things to watch. I was trying to talk my wife into watching it with me last night, but I couldn't get her to bite. So it's coming up though. In the next couple of days, I definitely will. It actually looks rather entertaining.
That's all I had. I had a good time with it. I thought it was a really good satire on foodies, food critics, and just the food industry. I thought it was really, really fun.
Yeah, I got the feel that they did some good research, and it seemed like they were making fun of some things that would be really entertaining for a chef to see. Like it seemed like they really had the depth piece. Like all I know is I keep remembering like everybody clapping and saying, yes, chef. And I'm like, oh, that's pretty entertaining. They got that right. Pretty right. And I could see how somebody from the outside would totally make fun of that. Let's see, what do we got here?
Chef, I have a question.
Please.
In the case, for instance, of the banana pudding, one approach could have been like, okay, only my female chef that makes it right, she's the one that is going to make it ever. And if she's on vacation, we're not going to have it. We's not available this week because she's the expert. Or try to bring your male chef a little bit up, a couple of notches so it's not as dry. But what I hear you saying is, hey, if you write it down to a science, which for me is so much fun. The metric system, growing up in Mexico, I think in meters and centimeters and grams and milliliters. For me, that's second nature. But what was your approach? Kind of like bring everything to grams so anybody can replicate it. Is that what you did?
Yes. Yeah, and I spent, it took me probably 3 months to get everybody to fully use grams. And for a little while there, it was a little bit like the Wild West, but it wasn't hard to get them to see the benefit of using grams because it was immediate. Like, if you follow this recipe 2 grams, we have less conversations. And look, I mean, I think I'm wonderful. But I know that I'm intolerable very often, and nobody really wants to have a conversation with the chef, right? Like, somebody makes a recipe, the last thing they want is the chef to tell them that it's wrong, right? So I just learned to leverage that. Like, look, if you don't want me to have you fix this, follow the recipe, or let's kit the recipe. And that's an in-between step that I guess I should spend a little bit more time talking about, but I have a step that I call kitting a recipe. And it's kind of what it sounds like. It's just kitting out the recipe. It's scaling everything and keeping the me's separate so that way we can ensure that the recipe is solid, right? And in some of the earlier phases of recipe testing, because it's always an evolution, there needs to be that like in-between step. Instead of giving them a recipe and saying, go replicate this. So like in the case of the banana pudding, it was like, okay, I talked to my female cook, my Amanda, and all right, give me your method. Let's see how you do this. Okay, make this with me. All right. Okay, so the method you wrote is kind of what you do, right? I mean, it's just the truth. Like, how many people don't realize the nuance that they put into the food that they're cooking. And so from there, reproduce that, then give it back to her and have her tell me when it's wrong or what's right, what's wrong, and then bring in Stephen and have them make it together. And have Stephen understand, well, it's okay that you weren't making it this way. It's not okay anymore to continue making it that way. Like, it's not a judgment. It's not me, it's not me hating on you. Like, that's not it. Like, look, nobody's buying this. It doesn't sell. It needs to never happen again. So here's how we're going to resolve that issue. And, and okay, sometimes it blew up in my face. Yeah, I don't ever want to make this again. Okay, fine. Fair enough. But, it's messy. We're dealing with people, right? Like, it's messy. So I just try and create those connections and those links and say, like, look, if you want Amanda to be the only one that makes the recipe, well, for you, that's okay. But for me, it's not, because I need this to be able to be reproducible. I need other people to know how to make this. I don't believe in sacred cows. I don't believe in the one who holds to being the keeper of all information. The more I know, or the more my team knows, the more I can do.
Thank you, Chef. Good information.
A very roundabout way of answering your question, for sure.
Chef, we did have a question in the chat from Chef Melinda.
Chef Burrows.
Yep, expanding about the that method you had spoken about with recipe evolution and verification, how we can use it in our own use. If you can want to expand on that, maybe.
So I call it the Keogh method, and that's something that we started calling it. I actually have a video on YouTube that probably goes a little bit more in depth. So if you're on my YouTube page and you search the Keogh method, you'll find it. But really, in its simplest form, is taking everything you're going to use to cook a recipe and weighing all of those ingredients ahead of time. Understanding exactly what raw weight is, right? Like what you have, like how much water is in this cup, right? And then cooking the recipe as I would as an artist. cooking how I would, adding the water, the little drip, the little splash, whatever, tasting, getting it to where I need to go. And then at the end of it all, reweighing this and understanding that the difference is what went into the recipe. And so that allows me to get super dialed in and still cook things the way that I would cook, but at the same time, get really granular on what it is that went into the recipe. So that way it's reproducible. Is that a little clearer? Chef Burrows, tell me. Did you leave? Yes, chef. Thank you. Let's see. Let's see, Chef Derek Connor. During line checks, I would find incorrect items, have the cook who followed the recipe walk me through it, always found the inconsistency or where they diverted from the recipe. Yep. 100% hold the team accountable. Yeah, it's funny. I didn't even read the next line, but yeah, 100% hold the team accountable. Help them understand, or even what I would say is understand or look for what I would call a critical control point in the recipe. If there's a point in the recipe where things go wrong all the time, perhaps you need to sand some corners off of that thing and make it a little bit smoother. Go ahead, you can ask me the question, Chef.
So it says, how would you lead people to be more honest if they made a mistake from your recipe?
So this, this may sound overly simplistic, but for me, it's about, to me, it starts with me being really upfront when I make mistakes, just owning it, being willing to eat it, being humble enough to say when I'm wrong, understanding when I didn't do something well, and really being upfront with my team about that. Admitting that I make mistakes, and hopefully that sets the example. More often than not, it does. It has more of an impact than anything else.
Looks like Jennifer has a question. So for example, if you were using a store-bought spaghetti sauce, same size, just every time, instead of dumping the jar in the pot, you would weigh it to make sure you have the same amount every time. I think she was talking about that recipe method.
Well, I would say that if the fast food method, I would probably think about it a little bit differently. So what I would say is I would make sure that my portion was consistent with what the recipe called for. So that way it was always the same. So if the recipe calls for a 10-ounce container of spaghetti sauce, store-bought spaghetti sauce, then I would just, my management, my work would then go into making sure that it's always a 10-ounce container of that sauce. Does that make sense, Jennifer?
Yes, it makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. If it doesn't, feel free to, please, by all means, tell me if I need to explain it differently. I'm happy to. Same
No, it
thing
makes
with,
sense. I was just wondering because I know, you have, like I said, 28-ounce container and you just dump it in there. I mean, you might get it all out one time. You may miss some the other time or whatever. So I was just wondering when you was talking about how precise, that's why I was just wondering.
Right. I mean, for me, I would try and, I guess I would go back to some fundamental stuff and helping them, making sure that they're using a rubber spatula to empty out the jar, to make sure that the jar is fully empty, and that way they're getting the full volume. I know some operations, it's just not effective to scale the sauce. Like I need to preface here, like I understand that there are operations that don't necessarily allow you to throw everything on the scale to measure the portion, right? But I would hone in then on the fundamentals of just making sure that they're, taking a rubber spatula and scraping out. Or if you add water to the jar and shake it out, just making sure that they're always adding 8 ounces of water, a cup of water. shaking it out and then dumping it in, whatever that is, just trying to get it consistent and helping them understand that 28 ounces of sauce is for 1 pound of pasta, or whatever your ratio is. Just being clear about that, right? Because I'm guilty of it. I have been for years, of saying like, okay, just grab a jar of sauce and cook some pasta. Where's that going to go? Like, at this point in my life, I know the catastrophe that's going to ensue. Somebody's probably going to cook a 5-pound bag of pasta. That does me no good, And so these lessons are just things that I've learned the hard way, just because I tend to learn best the hard way. So truth. Sorry, chef. So let's see. Christopher, did I answer your question, chef? Sorry, I know I got Jennifer. Thank you. Christopher, did I answer yours? Thank you. Yep, gotcha. And I'm still here. If anybody has any other questions, I'm happy to answer. I'm happy to take them about the presentation or otherwise. And if anybody has any other questions that they want to ask offline, feel free to shoot me an email. I saw it just got posted in the chat. So legitconceptsllc@gmail.com. Happy to answer questions there too. Feel free to reach out. I'm here for chefs. I'm here to make professional chefs' lives better. That's what I'm here for. So,
hey chef, I just got a question. I think it was sent by me as a direct message by mistake. But Chef Brad Ball asked, when working with students, how would you share reproducible methods while still imparting some of the passion that drives our business?
I think it depends on, I think it's a matter of finding them where they are, understanding what they can understand, and helping them see a bigger picture vision of what's possible. I'm trying to think of a good example of that. I guess if we're talking about maybe the spaghetti sauce example, helping them understand the importance of a ratio, helping them understand the importance of a recipe in that sense, but then understanding how that can evolve into something a little bit greater, or understanding how that learning can apply to something else, helping them think it more steps beyond. For me, I think there's a lot of, like I said, I'll go back to an earlier statement. Like, I really think the newer generation of cooks are bored. And so I think it's about trying to get them on board with the necessity of understanding these things. Like, you need to use this ratio of pasta to sauce because it's a value conversation. It's about food cost. It's about delivering a product to a guest and serving them a consistent product. It's about helping them see it in their shoes. Like, if you go to a restaurant and you don't get the same bowl of pasta with the same sauce, are you happy? Is that okay? And then just elaborating on that and helping them just see it a little bit bigger picture. And let's see. Christopher had another conversation, I think, or another question. Thanks, Brad. Good to see you here. Thanks.
Yeah, Chef Chris asked, what are some things you do to challenge yourself each day to keep yourself fresh?
Well, funny enough, I keep a fairly consistent rotating menu for meals, but I try and incorporate new ingredients, and I tend to spend about an hour a week researching techniques, ingredients, and seeing what's out there. But I would say that the food that I tend to cook, I really strive to be more and more, quote unquote, authentic with it. Like, if I'm cooking something Thai, I try and go as authentically Thailand as humanly possible on it. If I'm cooking something Indian, I try and find, some village or some particular region or area of India and cook it in that style instead of making things super generic.
it looks like one more question came in about would you comment on our new certified master pastry chef? How many CMPCs do we have currently? Do you know?
I'd actually rather not comment on that right now.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions? I did want to open the floor for John Selleck. So anyone that doesn't know, John Selleck is running for regional vice president. So if no one else has any questions for Chef Gerald Ford, I wanted to give John the floor for a couple minutes and he could kind of introduce himself. So Chef John, if you're there.
Hey, Derek, I'm here.
All right. Yep. The floor is yours.
Thanks. Hey, real quick, I want to thank Gerald Ford for doing this tonight. Gerald, this is like, I feel like this is the third meeting you've done for us. Maybe it's only two. But you really helped us get through the pandemic. You jumped right up and was probably like our showcase virtual meeting when we had a transition. And when I was the chapter president, we had a transition, and I was on Zoom meetings all day at work. And I was really concerned about how to make these sort of like dynamic, engaging Zoom meetings for chapter meetings, and you stepped right up and did it. And I think tonight was another great meeting. We extended it beyond the Cleveland Akron region, and I see a few people on here have joined us from other chapters, and I think it's fantastic. So I just want to thank you again and let you know how much I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you having me. So thank you very much. And I didn't have a chance to say thank you to everybody, but thank you very much. I appreciate it. And
yeah.
Good luck in your run for VP.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate Derek giving me this opportunity. I wasn't like ready. I'm at the hotel gym working out, so I'm like not dressed for this. But how many show of hands are wearing pajama pants right now? Like, I know Fernando's wearing pajama pants. Gerald, you're probably wearing pajama pants too. So I'm not the only.
I've got jeans on. There are jeans on.
Oh, you got jeans on. I know I'm not the only one here. I'm dressed for a Zoom call like everybody else here. So, Fernando, what you wearing? Huh?
Chef Ford is always very well dressed.
Okay. So I had to run out of the gym and jump on here. But no, I appreciate Derek giving me a few minutes. So I think a lot of you on the call know who I am. Former chapter president. And I've thrown my name in a ring to be vice president of the Northeast region. Voting happens for members in April. I believe it's April 23rd. So there's going to be you'll see some emails coming out for some campaigning and get the chance to meet all the candidates for all the board positions. So I just want to tell you, I just want to continue doing the work I've been doing with the local chapter. I think we've done a lot with this chapter over the 5 years that I was president. I couldn't have done it all by myself. I feel like I have to brag right now because that's what you're supposed to do when you're trying to get some votes. But where we're at, I couldn't have done it without everybody involved, the current board members, the previous board members. I'm really proud of what this chapter has become with our membership and with what we're doing with certification evaluations and competitions. And if you're interested in becoming a certified chef, we have a practical happening at Stark State on February 18th. So please come down and check it out if you have any interest in being certified. We're more than happy to talk to you about it. We want to see more certified chefs. Being certified has been great for me in my career. And I think it'd be great for everybody else's career as well. And we also have a meeting on February 20th at the Sesco Kitchen in Independence, the rationale. So make sure everybody comes sees us in person. But I just want to continue the work I've done with the local chapter and even some work I've done, nationally, being on the internal audit and being a former vice chair of the Chef and Child Foundation. Appreciate the time. You guys have any questions, please reach out to me. I appreciate everybody's support.
Thank you, Chef John. So again, I appreciate everybody logging on tonight for a great meeting by Chef Ford. One of the things I really took inspiration was talking about how you start from the science and then build to the artist from there. Because so many times people, chefs, cooks, young chefs want to come in and haven't even mastered a recipe yet and already want to deconstruct it and do all these things, but we don't have that core fundamental skill. So it was kind of funny that Chef Ford brought up goulash. We've been making it at the casino that I work at, and we do an Austrian recipe. There's so few ingredients. If you don't take care of those ingredients and then cook them in the proper way, the dish has no resulting depth of flavor if you just boil it all together. So following the technique and really taking the science into it, making it correct, is really, really important. Like John said, we have some upcoming meetings and events. If you didn't hear from before, we also have a competition in March. So we're doing F4 mystery basket, K category, cold food presentation. You can find out information on that and all of our upcoming meetings at acfchefscle.org. And you can find us on Facebook at ACF Cleveland, Akron-Canton. And that's all that I have for everybody. I hope you have a great night. Hope you had a great holiday season and had a happy new year. And we hope to see you again soon, whether it's virtually or in person. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, Chef.
Thank you.